I am an ordinary hard worker. I have a good position, and I do everything for my family. In the evenings after work, I like to have a delicious dinner and then lie on the couch with my wife and watch various shows. I was always surprised by the lives of people on TV. I thought it was crazy, but I did not suspect what my life would soon turn into and what discoveries I would make. If someone had told me 15 years ago that they would be waiting for me, then maybe I would not have married. I'm returning from work tired yet content. Working on an oil rig is always tough, but it brings me satisfaction. Every step on the rig requires attention and precision, and I'm proud that I know how to do it. Classic rock plays in my Ford F-150, and I feel the tension of the day slowly fading away. As I approach home, I see Irene, my wife, watering the flowers in the garden. She's always loved flowers. Her hair catches the last rays of the sunset, and she looks so peaceful. I smile at the thought of how lucky I am to have her. "Hello, love," I say as I get out of the car. "Hello," she responds, smiling back. Dinner's almost ready. The house smells of roasted chicken and fresh bread. Phyllis, our daughter, is doing her homework at the table. She's smart, always diligent in her studies. I like seeing her so focused, writing something in her notebook, lost in her thoughts. "Hello, Dad," she says without looking up from her notebook. "How are you, sweetheart?" I ask. "All good," she replies, finally looking up at me and smiling. "We have a math test tomorrow." I nod and go to the bedroom to change. My clothes smell of oil and metal, and I'm eager to take them off, looking forward to a shower. The water instantly washes away the day's fatigue, and I step out of the shower, feeling almost like a new person. At dinner, we talk about everything. Irene tells about her day at the hotel, where she works as a receptionist. She mentions a new client who had many questions about the best places in the city. Phyllis shares her achievements at school and plans for an upcoming party at a friend's house. I listen to them sipping tea, feeling happy. In these moments, I realize how important my family is to me. After dinner, I help Irene clear the table while Phyllis goes back to her studies. Irene and I stand in the kitchen, washing dishes together. Her hand accidentally touches mine, and I feel the warmth of her skin. We exchange looks and smile at each other. It's these simple, yet significant moments that make up our life together. The evening ends with watching TV in the living room. Irene lies down on the couch, closing her eyes, and I flip through the channels trying to find something worth watching. Suddenly, my eyes grow heavy, and I realize it's time to sleep. This day has been good, and I fall asleep with the thought of how grateful I am for everything I have. The following morning, I wake up to the rays of the sun piercing through the curtains. Today is my day off, and I plan to spend it at home, tending to minor tasks and relaxing. Irene is already at work, and Phyllis, as usual, was the first to leave the house, heading to school. I go down to the kitchen, pour myself a cup of coffee, and step out to the backyard to enjoy the morning freshness. Inhaling the aroma of the coffee, I contemplate my plans for the day. Perhaps I will do some minor repairs in the garage or simply sit with a book. Suddenly, I hear someone knocking at the front door. This is strange, as we rarely have unexpected guests. Opening the door, I find myself facing a woman I don't immediately recognize. She looks upset, her eyes red from crying. "Justin, it's Tracy. We've met a couple of times at your wife's corporate events," she says, barely holding back tears. "Yes, of course, Tracy, I remember you. What happened?" I ask, feeling a bit uneasy. She sighs and begins to explain. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. She claims to have seen messages between her husband and Irene, suggesting they had a close relationship. I listen, disbelieving my ears. The world around me seems to have stopped. "Are you sure about this?" I ask, trying to digest the information. "Yes, I've seen their messages. I didn't know who else to turn to," Tracy says, struggling to hold back tears. I invite her in and offer her a seat. We sit in the living room, and I listen as she shares her story. Tracy explains that she accidentally saw the messages on her husband's phone. She talks about how she and her husband have been having problems in their relationship for a while, but this was a real shock to her. Listening to her, I feel a sense of betrayal and anger growing inside me. Yet at the same time, the thought that this might all be a misunderstanding lingers in my mind. I can't believe Irene would deceive me. Tracy, I don't know what to say. This is incredible, I say, trying to make sense of the situation. I understand if you don't believe me, but I thought you should know and see for yourself. I don't know what to do, she says, standing up and preparing to leave. I walk her to the door, and as a farewell, she hands me a business card of a private investigator. I try to ask if she had substantial evidence, but she closes the door, leaving my head spinning. As soon as the door closes behind Tracy, I realize I can't just let this be. I need to find out the truth, no matter what. Lying in bed, I stare into the darkness, trying to arrange my thoughts in some order. The night is quiet, except for the gentle sound of the wind outside the window. Tracy's words whirl around in my head, and I can't shake them off. It feels like a dream, but I know it's reality. I get up and go to the kitchen, pour myself some water, and try to cool off. It's hard for me to believe that Irene could have deceived me. We've been together for so long, and I've always thought our marriage was strong. But now, after Tracy's words, I'm not sure about anything. Although I didn't trust Tracy much since I've only seen her a couple of times in my life. Sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the clock, the hands show 3 o'clock in the morning. I know I won't be able to sleep until I make some decision. Could it all be a misunderstanding? I wonder. But what if it's true? I remember how Tracy gave me the business card of a private investigator. Maybe it's worth calling, just to be sure, I ponder. The idea of hiring someone to follow my wife seems crazy to me, but I need to know the truth. I find the business card in my trouser pocket and turn on the light. It reads, Gerald Terrell, private investigator. I stand there holding it in my hands, feeling like a traitor, but maybe she betrayed me first, suddenly comes to my mind. Eventually, I decide that I cannot live in uncertainty. I have to find out if what Tracy said is true. I decide to call in the middle of the night. If the investigator answers, I'll start working with him. If not, then I'll put off this idea and not try to find out anything. It was somewhat of a lottery. I take the phone and dial Terrell's number. The voice on the phone seems calm and confident. Gerald Terrell, private investigator. How can I assist? Says the voice. I'm surprised that the investigator isn't asleep at such a late hour. I briefly explain the situation, trying not to get into details. Terrell listens to me carefully and suggests meeting to discuss everything in detail. Let's meet tomorrow morning at the Sunny Ray Cafe on the corner of 5th and Maple, I suggest. All right. Does 10 in the morning work for you? He asks. Yes, that's perfect. Thank you. I reply, and we end the call. Putting the phone down, I feel a mix of relief and anxiety battling inside me. I've made a decision, but I don't know what it will lead to. Need to wait for the morning, I tell myself, and slowly walk back to the bedroom. The night was restless. Finally, when the first rays of morning light penetrate the room, I get up, feeling like a zombie. I need coffee to somehow bring myself back to life. As I drink my coffee, my thoughts carry me back to the past. I remember the day I met Irene. It was at a corporate party where she was working as a waitress. She was so beautiful with her bright smile and sparkling eyes. We talked for just a few minutes, but it was enough for me to know I wanted to see her again. Our first dates were relaxed and fun. We both loved movies, walks in the park, dinners in small cozy restaurants. Every minute spent together felt special. I remember being nervous, proposing to her. It was a cold January evening, and I took her to an expensive restaurant. When I got down on one knee and pulled out the ring, her eyes filled with tears of happiness. The wedding was beautiful. We both wanted something simple, so we decided to have a small ceremony in her parents' garden. It was a sunny day full of laughter, love, and hopes. It felt like the whole world was at our feet. After the wedding, our life was filled with small joys and problems. I remember painting the walls in the future nursery together, preparing for the arrival of Phyllis. When she was born, it was the happiest day of my life. We both stood by the crib, looking at this little miracle, and I felt my heart overflowing with love and pride. Years have passed since then. Phyllis has grown up, become smart and independent. Irene and I supported each other in everything. Evenings spent together, our love for travel, family holidays, all this made up our life. But now, sitting in the kitchen and remembering all these moments, I feel anxiety growing in my heart. Could it be that all this time was a lie? I ask myself. The question arises, do I really know the woman I've lived with all these years? I look at the clock. It's almost time to meet with Terrell. I need to find out the truth, whatever it may be. With this thought, I finish my coffee and prepare for what lies ahead. I arrived at the Sunny Ray Cafe, located at the corner of 5th and Maple, a few minutes before the scheduled time. As I parked the car, I noticed a man in a suit who seemed to be waiting for someone as well. That must be Terrell, I thought to myself. Upon entering the cafe, the man immediately looked up at me. He stood up to shake my hand. "Justin, I'm Gerald Terrell," he said with a confident voice. We ordered coffee, and I began to tell him about the situation, trying to remain calm. Terrell listened attentively, nodding from time to time and making notes. "I need you to follow my wife, Irene. I want to know if she is truly being unfaithful to me," I managed to say, not without difficulty. Terrell seemed professional. He did not show any emotion as I spoke about my suspicions of infidelity. "I understand how important this is to you. You can count on my complete confidentiality and professionalism," he said. We discussed the details. Irene's schedule, places she visits, her usual routes. Terrell took careful notes, asking clarifying questions. "I'll start today," he said as we finished our discussion. "I'll contact you as soon as I have any information." Leaving the cafe, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, it was comforting to know that I was taking action to uncover the truth. On the other hand, I was afraid of what I might find out. I spent the day in unrest. It was hard for me to focus on anything. I tried to occupy myself with housework, but my thoughts kept returning to Irene and what might be happening behind my back. In the evening, when Irene returned from work, I tried to act as usual, but it was difficult. Every look she gave, every word she said seemed suspicious to me. I watched her, trying to catch something unusual in her behavior, but noticed nothing. We had dinner in silence as usual. Phyllis talked about her day, school matters, friends. Irene seemed completely natural, calm. All this made me doubt my suspicions. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding, I thought. But late at night, as I lay in bed, I received a message from Terrell. He wrote that he had the first results of his observation. My heart skipped a beat. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow morning," he concluded. Lying there, staring into the darkness, I realized that tomorrow my life might change dramatically. The next morning seemed unusually gloomy to me. The sky was covered with heavy clouds, and it seemed that even the weather reflected my inner state. Forcing myself to get up, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, waiting to meet with Terrell. My thoughts were erratic and anxious, trying to imagine what he might have found out. Time slowly passed, but finally the moment of the meeting arrived. I headed to the same cafe where we had met the day before. Terrell was already there, nodding at me in greeting. "Justin," he began as soon as I sat down, "I've conducted the initial observation of your wife. There's something I need to tell you." I felt my heart start to beat faster. "What did you find out?" I asked, trying to remain calm. Terrell took out several photos and a sheet of notes from his briefcase. "Your wife met with a man at a downtown cafe. They spent about an hour together. After that, she went shopping and then returned home. He showed me the photos, in which Irene was with an unfamiliar man. I looked closely at the faces in the photos, trying to figure out if I knew this person, but he was a complete stranger to me. "Have you found out who he is?" I asked. "Not yet," Terrell replied, "but I will continue the observation. We need to learn more before making any conclusions." I nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and relief. On one hand, I wanted to know the whole truth as soon as possible, but on the other, I was afraid of what that truth might be. Returning home, I tried to focus on everyday tasks, but my thoughts kept returning to the photos. I struggled to act naturally when Irene came back from work, but it was hard to look her in the eyes, knowing she might be hiding something important from me. That evening was difficult. We had dinner together, but the conversation was sparse and strained. Phyllis seemed to notice nothing, but Irene occasionally gave me questioning looks. After dinner, I went out for a walk. I needed some fresh air to clear my thoughts. Walking through the streets, I pondered what to do next. Should I confront Irene with a direct question, or wait until Terrell gathers more information? These questions swirled in my head. Coming back home, I found that Irene was already asleep. I lay in bed next to her, staring into the darkness, filled with mixed feelings. Anger, fear, sadness, and hope that all of this was just a misunderstanding. Despite a restless night, I woke up early the next morning. The house was quiet. Irene had already gone to work, and Phyllis was at school. Sitting at the kitchen table, I felt lost and alone. All these years, I had been confident in our marriage, but now every day began with doubts. I decided to occupy myself with routine chores, to distract myself somehow. I vacuumed, cleaned, did some minor repairs around the house, but even in these simple activities, I felt distracted. My thoughts constantly returned to Irene, the man in the photos, and what might have happened between them. After lunch, I decided to go outside to clear my head a bit. As I walked through the park, I watched the children playing, the couples in love, and the elderly spouses slowly strolling along the paths. They all seemed so happy and carefree. Have I ever been that happy? I asked myself. Returning home, I thought of Tracy. She was the first to challenge me, making me question Irene. I wondered if I should contact her to learn more about her situation. Perhaps it would help me better understand what's happening in my own marriage. In the evening, when Irene came back from work, the atmosphere at home felt tense. We both tried to act normally, but there was an awkwardness and distance between us. Dinner was silent, and I felt an unease growing inside me. After dinner, Irene went to the living room to watch TV, and I headed to my study. I sat at the desk and held my head in my hands, unsure of how to contact Tracy. After about 10 minutes, I pulled out a business card Tracy had given me. I noticed a number written in small digits with a T next to it. Thinking it must be Tracy's, I picked up the phone and dialed Tracy's number. She answered almost immediately. "Tracy, it's Justin. Can we meet? I need to talk to you," I said. "Of course, Justin. Tomorrow evening," she suggested. "Yes, that would be great. Right after work. Where would you like to meet? How about the Sunny Ray Cafe?" "Yes, let's do that," she replied. We agreed on a time and I hung up. Sitting in my study, I tried to gather my thoughts. I hoped that talking to Tracy would help me sort out my feelings and perhaps provide some answers. The next day, I felt on edge all day, waiting for the meeting with Tracy. Work passed in a blur. My thoughts were only on the upcoming meeting and what she might tell me. When the time came, I headed to the cafe. Approaching the meeting place, I felt nervous. What if Tracy tells me something that turns my life upside down? Tracy was already waiting for me at a corner table. She looked as tense as I felt. "Hi, Justin," she said as I sat down next to her. "Hi, Tracy. Thank you for agreeing to meet," I replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. We ordered coffee and I immediately got down to business. "Tracy, I don't know where to start. It's hard for me to believe what you've told me." "Are you sure about your words?" I asked. Tracy nodded. Yes, I'm sure. I managed to save a couple of videos from my husband's phone. They show closeness. She took out her phone and showed a video where the face of my wife and her involvement with someone was visible. We both fell silent. Tension hung in the air. This completely threw me off. She talked about how her husband started coming home late, how he frequently made calls and sent messages when she wasn't around. My thoughts were swirling. I remembered all the moments when Irene acted strangely, when she returned late from work, when she spent too much time on her phone. All of this now seems suspicious. Tracy, thank you for sharing this information with me. Can you send that video to me? I said, feeling anxiety growing inside me. Justin, I can't. I'm scared. We need to figure this out. She replied with sympathy in her voice. I was puzzled that Tracy didn't want to share the video recording, but I didn't press her. Although I understood that this recording was significant evidence and something could be done, we talked for another 10 minutes but didn't come to any conclusions, waiting for the investigators' results. I asked why Tracy hadn't hired a private investigator herself, but she said she was scared and afraid of her husband. We left the cafe. Tracy was dressed quite openly, in a short skirt and a top. To be honest, she looked very attractive. And not just to me, but also to two drunk guys who approached us. As Tracy and I said goodbye, and I had walked a few steps away from her, I heard how two guys clearly inebriated started harassing her. Tracy brushed them off, but one of the guys lifted her skirt. And seeing this, a greater anger woke up in me. I went straight to these guys and started yelling at them to leave her alone, but they began to touch her even more. Then I punched one of the guys, making him sit down on the asphalt, but the other hit me in the stomach with his foot, and I doubled over. He punched me, and I fell to the asphalt. I thought I had lost consciousness, but when I opened my eyes, I saw Tracy standing over me with a couple of guys next to her who had been sitting with us at the same cafe. When they saw the scuffle, they immediately ran out to help us. We thanked the guys, and Tracy came over to me, gave me a tight hug, and thanked me. I could smell the scent of her body. It was so gentle and free. I tilted my head directly towards her neck and started breathing her in. We stood like that for about 10 seconds, but then Tracy let me go. My head was still spinning, and we walked to my car, where she sat with me for about 20 minutes. She bought me some water, and I offered to drive her home. It was already evening and getting dark. I didn't want her to go home alone. But before that, she called her husband, who, as usual, was delayed at work. I drove her to her house, and we sat in the car for a few more minutes looking at each other. I don't know why, but I wanted to kiss her, but I restrained myself. However, Tracy kissed me on the cheek as a goodbye, and said to let her know if there were any news. I got home later than usual, and my wife was not there. She only returned 20 minutes later, excusing it with work, saying her night shift replacement was late. Lying in bed, I tried to find some way out, some clarity in this tangled situation. But the more I thought, the more I realized that the answers would not come on their own. After meeting with Tracy, my doubts only grew. The next day, I woke up early and spent the morning in contemplation, unsure of what to do next. Before Irene left for work, I felt an invisible wall between us. We both tried to act as usual, but the tension was palpable. In the following days, I tried to live a normal life, but after that terrible video where it was evident my wife was deceiving me, my life changed to a before and after. A week had passed since I saw the evidence of the affair from Tracy, but the private investigator had not given any news, and I specifically did not want to bother him. I wanted to meet with Tracy again, feeling that I missed her and was lacking simple communication because there was some tension in the house. I left work early that day, having an hour to spend time with Tracy and meet up at the same cafe. That hour flew by unnoticed. We didn't touch on the topic of our marriage or what was happening with our partners. We simply talked, and it felt good. Whether it was a desire to get back at my wife or not, my meetings with Tracy continued. Initially, we met once a week, then twice and eventually 3 times over the course of 2 months. I had honestly forgotten that my marriage was falling apart and that my wife was deceiving me. I didn't feel like I was betraying my wife because at the very least I wasn't kissing Tracy or touching her. We were just talking. I also contacted Terrell, but he said he was still gathering information and needed more time, as it wasn't a quick job. So I didn't bother him and waited for his call. The situation escalated when I realized I was meeting Tracy even on days when Irene was home, and we could have spent time together. I kept making excuses, claiming I was called into work or needed to help a friend. It was unbearable to be in the house with someone I trusted. Moreover, Irene wasn't opposed and didn't ask any further questions, and I believed this would allow the private investigator to gather more information about what she was doing while I was not at home. Our meetings with Tracy moved from a cafe to various other places. We walked in the park, drove around, and it was as if I was living another life, and everything seemed fine. One of those days it was already late. I should have been home, but Tracy and I had driven far away. We just lay on the hood of my car looking at the stars when Tracy said to me, "Justin, whatever happens, know that this is real," she said, but I didn't give it much importance. That evening we kissed for the first time. We were drawn to each other, and it was the perfect moment. Our kiss lasted about 5 minutes. My lips were tired. When I pulled away from Tracy, I saw 3 missed calls from Irene. I decided to turn off my phone and continue what we were doing. I unbuttoned Tracy's blouse and began kissing her gently. Then moving down, she seemed to really enjoy it, indicating so with her reactions, which attracted me even more. At some point I picked her up and carried her to the back seat of my car. She climbed on top of me, and in an instant I felt her warmth. It was so good with her, unforgettable. We became close, and you know what? I didn't feel guilty about it, and it was a strange feeling. I knew it was wrong, but I felt free and completely justified. My wife can deceive me, but I couldn't do the same. After that, Tracy and I had several more encounters, one of which happened right at her house on her sofa. I spent less time at home and more time with Tracy until one day. In the evening when Irene returned from work, I noticed that she was hiding something. She seemed agitated and kept checking her phone constantly. I observed her trying to figure out what was going on. Dinner was held in a tense atmosphere. We spoke little and each of us was immersed in our own thoughts. I felt I needed to say something, but the words got stuck in my throat. After dinner, Irene suddenly turned to me and said, "Justin, we need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. "About what?" I asked, feeling everything inside me tense up. "I know everything," she said quietly. "I know you've been deceiving me for the past 2 months." She pulled out a stack of documents from the kitchen cabinet, which contained photos and all the information about my affair with Tracy. I was stunned. "Where did you get this?" I asked, trying to hide my turmoil. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you deceived me, and it hurts me deeply. Did you think I wouldn't find out that you have a mistress?" she replied, looking at me with hurt and sadness in her eyes. I tried to explain, but my words were jumbled, and my only evidence was photos of Irene talking to some man, but her evidence was far more substantial. Irene wouldn't listen. She accused me of infidelity and of destroying our marriage, which was completely unexpected for me. "I don't know what to say to you, Irene. I really don't know," I said, feeling how powerless my words sounded. She stood up and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat trying to understand what had happened and how it turned out that in trying to expose my wife's infidelity, I had fallen into a trap myself. Irene packed my things and asked me to leave, saying that a lawyer would contact me in a few days, and she wanted to divorce me. And so I did. Leaving the house, I started calling my investigator, but his mobile was off. Then I tried to contact Tracy, but that too was futile. I had to go to a motel and settle there for some time. I began to feel a deep guilt for what I had done, because perhaps the video that Tracy had given me was not Irene at all. I started to doubt everything. I was lost. The divorce process was swift and painful. We turned to lawyers who helped us sort through the paperwork and financial issues. Each meeting with the lawyers was filled with tension and a sense of loss. The court hearing took place in a small courtroom. I sat opposite Irene, feeling as though every second stretched into eternity. The judge listened to our arguments and reviewed all the documents. I talked about my suspicions that my wife was deceiving me, but without the key witness Tracy, my words sounded weak and unconvincing even to myself. Tracy seemed to have vanished, just like the private investigator. Irene spoke about how my actions had destroyed trust in our marriage and accused me of deceitfully cheating on her. I couldn't understand how I had fallen into this trap. In the end, the judge made a decision. The marriage was dissolved, and Irene was granted the majority of our joint savings. I had to agree to pay alimony. The whole process felt like a dream. I couldn't believe this was actually happening. Leaving the courtroom, I felt something break inside me. Everything we had built together with Irene over the years collapsed in a few months. I looked at her, but she avoided my gaze. In that moment, I realized it was all over. Irene wanted to escalate the situation. She shared what had happened on social media, and as a result, I became an outcast. I was literally hated, and the most painful part was that Irene had told our daughter everything. After the divorce, my life changed drastically. I went through a deep depression, feeling utterly alone. Days merged into a gloomy hole, and I lost interest in work, friends who also turned their backs on me, and even simple household tasks. Every morning, I woke up with the thought that all this was just a bad dream. But reality quickly brought me back to bitter reflections. I started drinking more. I spent evenings alone with a bottle trying to forget my troubles. But each morning I woke up with an even greater sense of emptiness and disappointment in myself. Working on the drilling rig became a real challenge for me. I often found myself distracted thinking about the past, and my colleagues started to notice. It became difficult for me to focus on tasks, and I began to avoid interacting with people. My relationship with Phyllis also changed. She started spending more time with friends and less time with me. I understood that she was also struggling with our parents' divorce, but it felt like I had lost a connection with her. Every meeting with my daughter was filled with silence and reticence. One evening after a particularly hard day, I sat in a small motel room reminiscing about the better moments of our family life. I was flipping through old photo albums filled with happy times we had shared together. Remembering those times, I felt a growing pain and sadness inside me. My life after the divorce continued to spiral downwards. Every day was the same. Work, home, a bottle of wine in the evening. I felt completely disconnected from everything that used to bring me joy. 4 months had passed since my divorce, and I already felt 20 years older, having lost interest in everything and becoming a regular drinker. All this time I tried to get in touch with Tracy and the investigator, but it was futile. Everything changed the day I received a call from Phyllis's school. My heart stopped when I heard the teacher's words. "Your daughter was in an accident during a school trip. She's in the hospital. Her mother is unreachable, so we decided to contact you." I immediately forgot everything and rushed to the hospital. My hands were shaking, and I barely held back tears as I ran through the hospital corridors to her ward. Seeing Phyllis lying on the hospital bed with bandages and bruises, my emotions overwhelmed me. I grabbed her hand, feeling every beat of my broken heart. "Dad, I'm so glad to see you," she whispered in a weak voice. It turned out Phyllis had gone on a picnic with her class, something like a tour hike for a few days, while Irene had left town so she couldn't come. The doctor explained to me that Phyllis would need a blood transfusion and her kidneys were damaged. "You can donate blood if you have the same blood type and become her kidney donor," he suggested. I agreed without hesitation. It seemed like the only thing I could do for her. The nurse took my blood for testing and it matched, but to be a kidney donor other tests were required, including a DNA test. It turned out I couldn't be Phyllis's donor. Our DNA didn't match. The doctor explained that this meant I couldn't donate my kidney to Phyllis. This discovery literally pulled the rug out from under me. I sat in the hospital corridor feeling as though the world around me was crumbling. All these years I had loved Phyllis as my own daughter, cared for her, and now, memories of my marriage to Irene began to whirl in my head, of those moments when it seemed something was off. All this time, she had been hiding the truth from me. I felt betrayed, deceived, but most of all I was hurt for Phyllis. How would she react to this news? What should I do about her now? I spent the entire night in the hospital sitting next to Phyllis's bed holding her hand. My thoughts were filled with mixed feelings, anger at Irene, pain from the betrayal, and a desire to protect Phyllis from all of this. After a night in the hospital next to Phyllis's bed, the world I knew seemed shattered. The revelation that I was not Phyllis's biological father was very painful. I felt betrayed and deceived, but most of all I was worried about Phyllis and how this news would affect her. I left the hospital the next morning feeling completely drained. I needed time to think over everything that had happened and decide what to do next. I hadn't drunk alcohol for several days, although previously I couldn't go a day without drinking. I realized I needed to contact Tracy. She was the only one who could give me answers to my questions. Returning to my dingy room, I took out some money from a drawer and started searching online for someone who could help me find Tracy. I knew she couldn't just vanish. I knew it was useless to look for Tracy in the city because she was no longer at the house where she used to live. It wasn't easy, but on the third try I managed to get in touch with someone who got down to business. A week later I received information, and as it turned out Tracy was living in another city, an hour's drive from me. Upon receiving the information I immediately set out to the address. I rang the doorbell, and a couple of seconds later Tracy opened the door. She was still as beautiful, if not more so. Seeing me she flinched and wanted to close the door, but I assured her I meant no harm. Upon seeing me Tracy began to cry. I hugged her and once again felt her enticing scent. We just stood there embracing until Tracy started to apologize. She began to say that she didn't want things to end this way. That for the past few months she hadn't been able to live peacefully knowing that my life was going downhill, and she was afraid to confess something to me. I tried to calm her down and asked her to tell me the whole truth, and she admitted that her appearance in my life was no coincidence. She explained that Irene had contacted her and offered a substantial sum of money when Tracy was going through a tough time in her life, having lost her job and been left by her husband. Irene took advantage of this, offering Tracy a good sum of money that would allow her to live comfortably for several years. Tracy agreed, and Irene explained that her main task was to be close to me, so that I would deceive Irene, allowing her to divorce me. Additionally, Tracy was supposed to give me the investigator's number. In the end, Tracy and I had an affair, and Irene found a reason to divorce me. But why? That remained a question for me. I calmed Tracy down and told her that I had found out that my daughter was not actually my daughter, and I needed Tracy's help. Tracy had saved correspondences with Irene, as well as a video recording. She was supposed to delete but didn't. The video was real, and it was meant to hasten my infidelity. We talked for a long time, and in the end, we could have kissed, but I wasn't in the mood. I was determined to get my life back on track, and to punish Irene. After meeting with Tracy, I went home. I felt the need to do something to take action in order to regain control over my life. That night I made a decision. I had to meet with the most expensive and toughest lawyer. I needed to know the truth about Phyllis, about my marriage. Only then could I move forward if the truth came to light. I spent several days devising a plan. I decided to first consult with the lawyer to see if I could revisit the divorce terms considering the new circumstances. I also decided to tell Phyllis the whole truth. She had the right to know. As I prepared for these steps, I felt a resolve growing within me. I was no longer the person who let situations control his life. Now I was ready to fight. My days became filled with an incessant drive to act. I started with a visit to the lawyer to discuss the possibility of revising the divorce terms in light of new circumstances. The lawyer listened attentively and promised to review the case. Then I decided it was time to talk to Phyllis. It was probably the hardest conversation of my life. I met her after school and suggested a walk in the park. "Phyllis, I need to talk to you about something very important." I began feeling my throat tighten with anxiety. I told her the whole truth, that I was not her biological father. Phyllis was shocked. At first she was silent, then she started asking questions. I answered them as honestly as I could. It hurt to see her suffering from this news, but I knew she deserved to know the truth. After talking to Phyllis, I felt even more determined. I couldn't change the past, but I could influence the present and future, especially since the conversation with Phyllis was part of the plan with the lawyer. The next step in my plan was to apply to the court to revisit the divorce terms. I provided all the necessary documents and evidence of Irene's infidelity. Waiting for the court's decision was tough, but I felt I was making the right move. During this time, I also began to rebuild my life. I started spending more time at work, meeting with friends, and even took up sports. These small steps helped me feel better and regain a sense of control over my life. Irene found out everything and started sending me threatening messages, and then a group of people armed with bats came to my motel. I saved all of Irene's messages and called the police, accusing her of threatening my life. The lawyer also took this case to court. A couple of weeks before the trial, Tracy returned. I don't know how she found me, but I was glad to see her. She moved into my small room and tidied it up. We had no intimate relationship, and she offered to help me during the trial as a victim. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. The judge listened attentively to my arguments and considered the presented evidence. Irene's parents were also at the trial, and my lawyer, and I thoroughly discredited Irene. Firstly, it turned out that the investigator who was supposedly working with me was my wife's partner, and a DNA test confirmed that Phyllis was his daughter. Secondly, Irene and I got married because of her pregnancy, which meant that our marriage was a sham from the very beginning. It was annulled. Thirdly, Phyllis's biological father was required to reimburse me for all the expenses I had incurred for Phyllis over the years. Fourthly, Irene had threatened me, and Tracy also confirmed that she acted under severe threats from Irene. For all this, Irene could have faced prison time, but I didn't want to put her in jail. The decision was in my favor. The divorce terms were revised, and now Irene had to pay me compensation, as did her partner. I was to get my house back, which had gone to her after our divorce. I also presented Irene with a condition that I would not pursue criminal charges with my lawyer if she disclosed the truth on her social networks. She stubbornly denied everything, but ultimately capitulated because our evidence was irrefutable and resistance was futile. Irene suffered humiliation during the trial, and I watched as her persona shattered into pieces, just as mine had some time before. I silently reveled in her suffering. Leaving the court, I felt a mix of relief and bitterness. I had won the case, but the cost of victory was high. Yet deep down I knew it was the only way to restore justice and start a new chapter in my life. The court's decision was a form of redemption for me. I felt that justice had finally prevailed. Now I had the means and opportunity to start anew. I decided to first tidy up my home. I got rid of everything that reminded me of my marriage to Irene and started to refurnish my home to reflect my interests and preferences. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a new chapter in my life. Tracy supported me, and we renovated the house together, eventually deciding to sell it and buy a new one. Tracy and I became an official couple. I also began to spend more time with Phyllis. Although I was not her biological father, I still felt responsible for her. We talked a lot, and I tried to support her during this difficult period. Gradually, our bond strengthened, and I realized that regardless of everything, we remained a family. I also decided to focus on my health and well-being. I started working out regularly, eating properly, and drinking less. These changes made me feel better both physically and emotionally. Moreover, I experienced quality intimacy with Tracy, which also bore its fruits. Phyllis graduated from high school and was admitted to college, which I paid for. Irene lost her job after her disgraceful act was exposed, and her partner, Gerald Terrell, turned out to be an investigator, but lost his job due to his actions. Now Irene and Gerald are in a dire situation. living in a city where they are unwanted, but I believe they got what they deserved. Looking back, I see how much has changed. I lost a lot, but at the same time I found myself. These trials made me stronger and wiser. I realized that life goes on, and that despite all difficulties, there is always an opportunity to start anew. I often recall Tracy's words to me before our first kiss. "Justin, no matter what happens, know that this is real," and I get chills. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.